Hey there, welcome back to Coding at Home with the Code Hub. Hey, welcome back. I'm Matt with the Code Hub. We're going to talk through some of your assemble the camera code today. But before we start, I wanted to mention again the Swift Student Challenge. It's exactly what we've been doing this whole time along. We've been playing around with playgrounds and Swift and trying to come up with very cool interactive um, stuff to play around with, for lack of a better word, in our playgrounds. The whole goal of the Swift Student Challenge is for you to build an interactive Swift playground, submit it to the judges, and you can win. I think it's a jacket and some kind of cool stuff from Apple, and it's just a really nice way to be celebrated as a student developer. In Europe, unfortunately, you have to be 16 years or older. In the US, I think it's 13 or older. But if you have an idea for a cool interactive Swift playground you want to build, and maybe you're not sure where to start, or you want a little bit of help getting your idea realized, we can definitely work with you to get it going. That's kind of what we've been doing throughout these last couple of weeks. The other thing I want to highlight is that our we had our inaugural look back session on Friday. It was a Zoom call, so it was a little bit more personal. Uh, we'll still be going over Hello Byte for the next few weeks, probably for the month of May. So feel free to join in. Go to the URL on your screen now, and you can register, and we'll send you the details for the Zoom chat. It's Fridays at 1 p.m. So it basically replaces this live stream for you, and it's a pretty easy introduction to Swift and Swift Playgrounds. So no matter your level of programming experience, it's definitely something you can join no matter how far along you are in your coding journey. But today we're going to get back to assembling our camera. So let's jump back over to the iPad. All right. So we're going to open up Swift Playgrounds, and we're going to go into our assemble your camera playground. So your homework last night was to do a bit of design and reshape your camera and maybe move some of the elements around. Now, if you didn't, there's nothing to worry about. We'll get to that later in the playground. We've gone through all of this code here where we added our properties that we went over again yesterday to our class, my camera class. We can see that we're creating instances of types there. We added them in our initializer for our my camera class. We added them to the space. This is where, if you were working on the layout, this is where you would have done some of your work, changing the point you were drawing stuff at, changing the size of it maybe. We even did this. We connected the shutter button pressed property to this camera view.trigger, and we're going to go into that a little bit more today. We created this public func start method on our my camera class. And all we do inside the body of that function is called camera view.start. And remember that camera view refers to this property right here. So classes are great because they help us organize our code, but sometimes that initial organization can take a little bit of thinking to get around. So this can be a pretty large file, and we just have to remember that, oh yeah, we defined that up here inside this curly brace. So that now my whole class has access to this camera view property. And then you can see us calling this start function that we created over here in main. So we create an instance of my camera. So all those components that we configured, we created. We added the camera to a certain point, and then we started the camera. Now you might be thinking, man, this is a lot of work. Why couldn't I just do all of this work in here? Why couldn't I take all of my code in here, create a property called camera view, create one called shutter button, front, back, zoom slider, add a container to put them into in the main file, set its background color, do all of this, add the components to that container view, hook up the shutter button, call camera view start. We could have done all of that in here, and that would be fine. It would work perfectly well. But what if, for some reason, we wanted to have two cameras on the screen? If we wanted to do something like this, I'm going to create a property called camera 2. And I'm going to say it's going to be an instance of my camera. And I can hit autocomplete there. And I'll use the parentheses from the autocomplete as well. So now I have two instances. Now, as we've seen before, this instance doesn't mean anything unless we add it to the space. So let's jump down and do space dot, and then we'll do add. We'll give it a size and a point. So we're going to add our camera 2. So down here, camera 2. At point, well, we don't want to put it at the same point because then it would just draw over the other one. That wouldn't be very exciting. So let me scroll up. Actually, point is right at the beginning. Hit the parentheses. I'm going to choose an X and a Y. So let's see. Our other one was placed at 0, 0. So let's maybe place that one at X is 0, but Y we'll put it above. So maybe we'll put it at 300. And then our size, we can give it the same size. So let's go find that size class. Use the parentheses. Our initializer, we'll give it a height and a width. So we'll give it a 400. Actually, maybe we'll make this one a little bit smaller. 300 and 300. So now if we hit run my code. All right, I'd like to access our camera. All right, cool. So the bottom one started. And we've hooked up the button. If we also say camera 2, and then hit run my code. So we're going to start camera 2 as well. Well, now I've only got one because that's the latest one I started. But you can see how I can actually play around with this a bit and add multiple instances of my camera. Without having to go and lay out all that stuff a second time. So it's a really handy thing if we're building something that we think we might reuse. And we're going to find that we do reuse this My Camera class quite a bit. All right, so I'm going to get rid of all of that stuff. So now we just have our original camera. You can see the one constant in our space here is that coffee mug, or a coffee mug anyway. All right, so let's go have a look. So we created our start function where we call camera view.start. We learned again what public meant. We started the camera. We answered this question. Right? What does the word public mean in front of a class name or function? It means that code in the main file or any other file can use that class or function. We connected the shutter button. So we ran it and start function turns on the camera and then pressing the shutter button makes the photo taken sound. Perfect. All right. We're going to move on to styling our camera now. So let's hit next. And the nice thing, remember again, this My Camera code follows us around. The code from main doesn't follow us around from page to page, but all the code that we've written in here, including our new start function, follows us to the next page. So now we're going to add our own style to the camera by changing the properties of each component. Now you'll notice that when I showed my camera, I said that last night for homework, I was going to move elements around. But I actually had an idea for today's session that we'll kind of walk through, and I'll hopefully help you place your elements a little bit better as well. All right, so let's see. You can change the position or size of any of the components by editing the code that adds a component to a space. So we've seen that already. This is the code here that adds the components to the space. So we can change the position or size of the viewfinder. And then to change the position or size of the camera itself, you have to edit the code in main. So that's that bookmark looking tab. All right, so what we're going to do is to figure out where I want to place stuff. I know for me personally, I work a little bit more visually. So what I would do if I were trying to place things on the screen, first I would run it and see what it looks like now. And I'd say, okay, cool. I have the buttons here, I have the slider down here, and I have my viewfinder here. That doesn't look like the image that I drew originally. So let me go back to that image. I'm going to open up Sketches. You should open up whatever application you use to draw your camera. Okay, so what I did was in Sketches, I had this image here. This was my amazing design for my camera. I'm going to have the zoom slider on the side. I'll have the shutter button down below, and I'll have the front back button up above. And then the viewfinder in the middle. So what I could do is I could actually, I believe this is the one for copying. I could copy this image. I can also make the background transparent. With the Pro app. All right, so I'll go back here. And what I did was I basically, we'll go back again here. I created a new document. And I said here, I wanted to create an image from paste. So because I copied the previous one, I can now paste an image in here. I can move it, scale it, and rotate it. I'm going to make it a bit smaller. And then I'll go down here and I'll hit the check mark. This is if you're working in Sketches. This is going to behave differently if you're working in Notes or if you're working in Paper or another application like that. The next thing I did to try to figure out where I wanted to place these things was I picked a color. So I picked gray. And in fact, we'll pick a lighter gray. And then I picked a pencil tool to just lightly sketch out my grid. So I know that in the middle, this is going to be 0, 0. Anything over here is going to be positive X. Anything up here is positive Y, negative Y, negative X, negative Y, negative X, positive Y. So if I want my zoom slider, I kind of want that one at, well, let's see. X is going to be different. It's going to be minus something. Let's say minus 100. And then Y will be 0. And then for my back front button, I'm going to say that X is going to be, it looks like maybe 50 roughly. And then Y will be about 50. And then for the shutter button, X is going to be 50 because I want it the same as that one. And then Y is going to be, say, minus 50. And I might have to tweak these. This is just to give me an idea of where it's going to be laid out. And my viewfinder in this picture looks a little bit off center, but maybe what I'll do is I'll make it so that it fits right in the middle. We'll give it a shot. So this is what I would do if I was, before I wrote any code to change my point that I was drawing stuff at or the size of any of my things. So let's go back to Swift Playgrounds now. This is a worthwhile exercise to do this evening, to sit down with your camera design and figure out where the elements on the page go. If you're still at that page, that step where you're trying to add your camera design to your Swift Playground. So I'm going to open up Swift Playgrounds again. And I'm going to say, all right, so I wanted to add my camera view. We added a bit lower. We'll leave the camera view where it is. The shutter button, we said positive 50. Y is minus 150. We'll try doing Y is minus 50 like we kind of guessed at. If I double tap the home button, I can see my measurements in Sketch. Double tap to get back. So my front back button is going to be 50. And the Y is also going to be 50 because I want that above fold. I can leave the sizes the way they are because I don't mind the sizes. Those work pretty well. And then the zoom slider is going to be, X is going to be minus 100 we said. And then the Y is going to be 0. So let's try running our code and see what that looks like. I just took the numbers that I kind of made up on the diagram and figured I would see how it looks. Okay. Not exactly it. Maybe I've got to move that over quite a bit more. So let's move that over a little bit more. Instead of X is 50, we'll do 150. We'll do that for our front back button as well. 150. Let's see our zoom slider, maybe make that minus 150. Let's run our code. Okay, that's looking better. Close, close. Okay, we're going to leave this for now and go back to styling our components the way this is roughly right. We'll figure out how to change the zoom slider in a second. But let's go check out some of our other style options here. So now it mentions here that we can use our properties, and these properties are these things up here. And then the properties of a camera view, say, we can access. So we can style the components by doing things like this. We can add a border color and a width to our camera view. So let's see, camera view, dot, and we'll scroll over to find our border color. And we'll assign it a value. We'll assign it one of these color literals so we can say, okay, it's going to be that light blue, and we're going to give it a width. We're going to make it kind of small. So dot, scroll over to border width. So we're going to give it a border width of 2. Now this one looks interesting here, rotation. We can rotate the camera view. Well, I don't want to rotate the camera view, but what I do want to rotate is my zoom slider. So we'll say zoom slider dot rotation equals, say 180. Let's give that a shot. Let's run it and see. As you change each one of these properties, it's really helpful to go playing around with and running it and see what you have. So you can see I added my border. All right, my rotation isn't great. So let's figure out what I need to put in there. Maybe let's try 90. Oh, that looks way better because now my zoom slider is vertical. That's cool. Maybe now that I've rotated it, I might say, do you know what? I need to move it over just a little bit more. So I need to bump it back a little bit because I want it over here. So maybe we'll make that minus 175 and run it. Oh, that looks way better already. Okay. We might want to do the same with our buttons. We can add rounded quarters like we've done before. We can add things like an overlay image. So let's try doing that. Let's try adding an overlay image to our camera view and see what what happens when we have added an overlay image. Overlay image, and we'll assign it. We can pick this element here out of the autocomplete bar, and that'll let us pick an image. So let's try picking that as our overlay image. And let's see what happens. Okay, well, it kind of obscures my view. That's not great. Let's try picking a different overlay image. Let's try picking maybe this frame. Remember, we used this frame in the last playground. Let's run our code now. Okay, that's a bit more interesting because now because there's transparency in this image, I can kind of see through it. So that's where you would use your overlay image. It's going to be drawn over the top of your camera view in this case. Now I could add the same to my buttons if I wanted to. If I said, all right, front back button, oops, back to my playground. We just assign the image. We can assign the same image to our buttons if we wanted to. But let's not do that right now. All right, so that's my overlay image. It's going to show up over my whatever component I assign it to, particularly the camera view here. This mask image might be interesting. Let's try out the mask image. We're going to remove this one. Actually, here, tell you what, we'll remove it by just commenting it out, because we might want to come back to that later. Now we'll say camera view dot mask image equals, and then we'll use that same image autocomplete thing. Let's use a cloud for kicks. And let's run my code and see what happens with that. Okay, so the mask image is kind of interesting because it's not transparent itself. But when I use that as the mask for my camera view, the camera view takes the shape of my image. That's really interesting. Now, if I use a regular old image like the one that I drew. Now this doesn't have any transparency in it because as you saw, I don't have the pro version of Sketches. I use that and I run my code. It doesn't look like anything's changed because my image is a rectangle and my camera view is a rectangle. So the whole thing becomes transparent so that I can take pictures through it. So not very interesting. But if you're trying to achieve a really interesting shape, like, for example, I know one of our coders drew a wolf as her camera, or you have the shark that you want to draw as a camera, and you want the mouth to be the opening. That's the thing that you would add as your mask, so that your image looks like it's in the mouth of a shark. Let's see, if I really wanted to, I could make mine in the shape of a bear. So that's cool. We'll stick with that one for now. That'll be our camera shape. So mask image is a really powerful one to use with your camera view. All right, so we've seen what our viewfinder looks like. So let's go on to the next page. This is something that you can tweak yourself after the fact. Now we're going to look at styling the buttons. Because right now, if you remember what my buttons look like, they're just rounded rectangles. They're not very exciting. We can change the border color and width, which does the same thing. It's the same properties that all these other ones have. We can set a background color or an image. We can change the rotation like we did with our zoom slider. We can even set the transparency. Well, let's try adding an image to our front and back, our shutter buttons first. So our shutter button dot image, we'll assign that an image literal. The image literal and color literal things just mean that we're able to actually just pick visually an image or a color from the sort of the built-in Apple pickers. So let's see. So our shutter button, we want to have it be kind of obvious what it does. Maybe, well, the one with the bite out of it's not bad. We don't want to have it be this. Let's have it look like this. And then our front back button, we'll do the same. We'll make it very clear what this front back button does. There's a hand-drawn one. I kind of want it to match the same style that I've got here. Oh, here's a nice one. There we go. So we'll use that one. Let's run our code to see what it looks like. Okay, not bad. This one's a little stretched. Maybe I could change the size. So if this image looks stretched, I might go up to where I add my front back button and change the width and the height. Now, I might use something like transparency. So if I said, actually, I want to make the front back button not as important. So we use this property called alpha on our image, on our button, sorry. And it's basically a number between 0.0 and 1.0. So this is kind of fun to play around with. You can actually make it almost disappear. If you say something like, okay, we're going to make it 0.1, and we run our code. Now this is just the front back button. You can see it looks really faded now. It still works. I can still tap on it, but it looks really faded. And if I change that to 0.9 and run my code, it looks almost fully opaque, which is the opposite of transparent. So the alpha is kind of interesting because the closer to 0 you get, the more transparent your button is, or your slider, or your camera view. We could have made our camera view more transparent. So go play around with those and try to get to close to your design. I'm going to leave that at 0.9. I won't bother with rounded corners on those guys yet. And then these are the options on the zoom slider. So this process that we're going through here, where we're picking the different properties, and then we're also reading through this here, is a lot like what you would do if you were working with any new class. So our zoom slider is just a type that we're working with here. And this is like the documentation you'd find on developer.apple.com for any of the other classes we've been working with, like an array. We worked with arrays back in Everyone Can Code Puzzles, like strings, like variables. All those things have documentation on developer.apple.com. And we would do the same thing. If we wanted to know how to use any of these things from Swift, we would have to go off to the documentation and read through it. A lot like we're doing here. We're reading through, all right, well, we can set the slider image, slider color. Maybe let's change our zoom slider's color. So we'll set the slider color and we'll assign this to it. And we'll say, all right, well, we want to make it kind of darker blue. We can set the minimum track color and the maximum track color. So the color will change from the bottom of the slider to the top of the slider, or from the right end to the left end. So let's do that as well. Let's customize that. We'll do the minimum track color. We're going to make it gray. We'll have it go all the way up to zoom slider, the maximum track color. These are all things that are well worth playing around with, because it'll give you a bit of practice with the properties, It'll change the look and feel of your camera. Let's hit run my code to see what it looks like. Okay, so now I can see that when I have the stuff below my zoom slider, it's gray, and the stuff above is green. So I can see it, I can change it here by moving the zoom slider up and down. As we can see, we played around with the rotation of our zoom slider already. We might want to group all of those together. Where we change the zoom slider, we might want to have them all together. Or maybe we want to do all the rotations at the same time. This is kind of an organizational thing that's up to you. And can you tell me what the following does? So this camera view.mask image equals an image. What would we call mask image? Is it a property of camera view? Is it a method of camera view? Is it an instance of camera view? If you shout really loud, I'll probably be able to hear you. So go on, shout out your answer now. And this is true even with the videos after the fact. So I'm going to guess and say that it's a property of camera view. Then that's right. So as it mentions here, the mask image changes the appearance of the viewfinder. And we saw that with our new bear-shaped camera view. So this is a lot of work, and this is worth playing around with for the rest of today. If you have any more time to play around with this, go and style your components. And now for real, this is the homework, is to go and finish off your camera in terms of the elements and placing them in the right place. Make it look as roughly the same as your design. Play around with the combination. We have different combinations of properties that you can add. Try seeing what happens when you add an overlay image and a mask image. So that's your task for the rest of the day. This is a lot of fun, this part, because you actually get to see the results of your playing around. And let's see what you come up with. Because tomorrow we're going to start hooking up the other buttons, the front and back button, and some of the other elements. I hope you enjoyed today, and we'll see you tomorrow.